Most people tend to remember the army of the dead as an unstoppable force, a spectral host that sweeps across the fields of Middle-earth without fear or hesitation. It's easy to assume their role is simple: ghosts bound by old vows, waiting for the right moment to act. But Tolkien includes a small, unsettling detail that complicates that familiar picture. One hint that these spirits were not merely cursed, but deeply afraid. And their fear was not directed toward Sauron, nor toward the living armies gathering for war, but toward a single man who walked into their darkness without hesitation. Once you notice it, the entire story gains a different weight. It becomes less a tale of ghosts and more a revelation about authority, memory, and the cost of a broken promise. The truth here reveals itself quietly. But before we continue, if you're new here or haven't subscribed yet, consider subscribing, as it really helps the channel. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Aragorn is often described as noble, commanding, or wise, but beneath all of that lies a quiet certainty about who he is meant to be. He doesn't seek dominion for its own sake. Instead, he carries the burden of lineage with humility and resolve. That blend of strength and compassion is what makes his confrontation with the dead so compelling, not as a conqueror, but as a king who understands fear, failure, and the cost of redemption. To understand why the dead feared him, we have to step backward long before the War of the Ring, before Gondor's decline, and even before Aragorn's birth. Their terror was rooted not in the man before them, but in an oath sworn in the shadow of Numenor's last days. The fear they carried was ancient, tied to a kingly authority they once defied, and to a lineage that survived against all odds. Tolkien gives us the foundation in The Return of the King, where the dead reveal their dread at the sight of Aragorn's unsheathed blade. It is the reforged sword symbol of Isildur's authority that pierces through their long ages of guilt. As Tolkien writes, "Oathbreakers, why have ye come?" And the dead replied, "To fulfill our oath and have peace." This exchange anchors their relationship in the ancient bond between king and subject, oath and consequence. So the question becomes, why did this spectral army, untouched by time, untroubled by swords, and fearless of any mortal power, shudder at the arrival of Aragorn? What made him the one living soul able to command them, compel them, and ultimately grant them the peace denied for centuries? To understand the army of the dead, we must begin in the Second Age, when Gondor was still young and its people were shaped by the legacy of Numenor. Before the Great Kingdom fell, many men of the mountains swore allegiance to Isildur, promising to stand with him against Sauron. Yet when Sauron's shadow grew, they turned away from their oath, influenced, some say, by fear of the Dark Lord or by old loyalties that predated Númenórean rule. Isildur's wrath was not the anger of a tyrant, but the judgment of a king whose authority had been openly defied. In response, he cursed them to linger until the oath was fulfilled. But because they never marched against Sauron, they found no release in his downfall. Instead, they drifted into the Twilight World, bound to the haunted passes beneath the White Mountains. Centuries passed, kingdoms fell, Gondor waned, and still the dead waited. No king came to call upon them, for no rightful heir of Isildur had yet claimed the throne of Gondor. The people who lived near the Dwemoorberg reduced the dead to legend's shadows on the mountainside, whispers in the hollows. But the truth remained. The curse endured unbroken, tied to a bloodline nearly forgotten. This long silence created a tension in the world, an ancient obligation suspended over the centuries, unresolved and growing colder with every generation that passed. The turning point arrives late in the Third Age, when Aragorn finally accepts the role he had long avoided, the true heir of Isildur. His decision to take the paths of the dead is not made lightly. It is an act of courage grounded in the knowledge that war against Sauron cannot be won by force of arms alone. The southern coasts will soon fall, and without help, Gondor will be overwhelmed. Aragorn knows that the only army capable of turning the tide lies in the shadowed realm beneath the mountains. He brings with him Legolas and Gimli, companions who share both his loyalty and his resolve. As they enter the haunted caverns, Tolkien describes the oppressive silence, punctuated by distant, echoing steps. The dead gather behind them, drawn by the presence of the heir of Isildur. Their fear does not take the form of flight. Instead, it manifests in obedience. They follow because they must. They tremble because they remember. Aragorn's command deepens as he reveals the reforged blade, Andúril, Flame of the West. This sword is not merely a weapon, it is a symbol of kingship and the restoration of Isildur's line. For the dead, seeing the sword is like seeing the past made present. The king they betrayed stands before them once again, in the flesh. Tolkien tells us that the dead wailed when Aragorn declared his purpose. These spirits, who knew neither pain nor death, reacted with something closer to despair. Aragorn was not a threat they could not be harmed, but he was a reminder of the oath they could not escape. His authority carried the weight of centuries, and with it the inevitability of their redemption or ruin. When Aragorn marches southward with the dead behind him, the world of the living reacts with terror. Cities panic at the sight of the Grey Host, and men flee from their approach. Yet the dead themselves are equally unsettled. The king has come, the oath must be fulfilled. Their long, shadowed half-existence is ending one way or another. At the Battle of Pelargir, the dead sweep across the Corsair fleet, striking terror into hardened sailors who had no defense against a spectral army. With Aragorn at their head, the dead rout forces that would have easily turned the tide in Sauron's favor. And when the ships are taken, Aragorn dismisses them with the words, "Go and be at rest." With that, the curse that began in the Second Age finally breaks. It is in this moment, not in the darkness of the caves, but in the open air of Pelargir, that we see why they truly feared him. Aragorn was the first king since Isildur who could grant them the one thing they desperately desired, yet could never obtain alone, the peace of death. What makes this story resonate is that the dead do not fear Aragorn as an enemy, but as a reckoning. He carries a legacy they could not deny, and he embodies a justice they long fled. Tolkien often explored the idea of oaths as binding forces, moral, spiritual, and even metaphysical ties that shape the destiny of men. The oath of the dead was not merely a political agreement, it was a spiritual covenant, and breaking it placed them outside the natural order of life and death. Aragorn's authority over them is therefore not magical dominance, but rightful kingship. His presence forces the dead to confront their own betrayal, something they had avoided for centuries. Their fear is the fear of a shadow finally meeting the light, of a wound reopening after ages of numbness. In this way, the paths of the dead become a symbolic journey through guilt, redemption, and the responsibility that comes with lineage. Aragorn does not force them to serve through fear, he leads them toward the fulfillment of their own buried hope. Tolkien uses this tale to explore the weight of promises, the cost of cowardice, and the possibility of redemption even after long ages of failure. The dead are not monsters. They are reminders of what happens when duty is abandoned and when fear is allowed to shape one's fate. Their suffering is self-inflicted, yet their redemption is communal, made possible only when a true king arises to call them back to the path they once turned from. Aragorn's role is not merely that of a commander, but of a restorer. By guiding them to fulfill their oath, he also restores the moral balance broken in the Second Age. It is a moment that reveals the heart of his character. He is not a man seeking power, but a man healing wounds, both ancient and new. The release of the dead has profound consequences for Middle-earth. Without their intervention at Pelargir, Sauron's forces would have secured the southern coasts, cutting Gondor off from essential reinforcements. Aragorn's arrival at Minas Tirith, leading the captured Corsair ships, is the turning point that saves the city from destruction. But the consequences reach further. The fulfillment of the Oath of the Dead symbolizes the restoration of the House of Elendil itself. In commanding the dead, Aragorn proves his lineage, not through lineage alone, but through action, leadership, and wisdom. Gondor, which had long awaited a king, finally receives one who brings closure to ancient burdens. Their release also marks a shift in Tolkien's world from the lingering shadows of the Second Age toward the healing of the Fourth. Ghosts of the past, both literal and metaphorical, are laid to rest as the Age of Men begins in earnest. And yet Tolkien leaves one question unanswered. What truly was the nature of the dead's existence? Were they spirits bound by divine decree, or did their own guilt tether them to the mortal world? Tolkien hints at both possibilities, but never fully explains the mechanism of their curse. This ambiguity keeps the story rooted in myth rather than system, haunting, unresolved, and larger than any single explanation. It is this uncertainty that makes their fear of Aragorn even more compelling. We cannot fully understand what they were, only what they felt when faced with the one king who could end their long wandering. In the end, the army of the dead feared Aragorn because he was the living reminder that even the deepest failures must one day face the hope of redemption. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to subscribe and leave a like on the video, and I hope I see you in the next one.